I read 10 novels in March. Last month was a strange month for most of us, and April just doesn't look much different. I know that some people are struggling with their reading, and that's understandable. I get that some people are finding it hard to focus on a book for long because of all the overload of information and the anxiety that so many of us are feeling at the moment. I was afraid that anxiety would take over and my own reading would suffer, but luckily it didn't, and I still had a productive reading month despite everything. Hey guys, welcome back to Bookish Islander. My name is Juan. I hope you're all doing very well. So today I'm going to tell you about the 10 novels I read in March. Most of them were good, some were even great, and there were a couple of disappointing reads as well. The first book I finished in March was Dunia's Last Love by the German writer Elena Bronsky. In February, I read Bronsky's literary debut, Broken Glass Park. If you want to find out what I thought about it, go check out my April wrap-up. I keep all my wrap-ups in the same playlist, so it's easy for you guys to keep up with the books I read every month. I liked Broken Glass Park a lot. I knew that Dunia's Last Love would be very different, and I was not wrong. I read Tim Moore's translation of Dunia's Last Love. This is the story of an elder woman's return to Chernobyl. With Dunia's Last Love, Bronsky has created another strong female character. If in Broken Glass Park the protagonist is a Russian teenager with a chip on her shoulder, Dunia is a Russian senior with a different kind of chip on her shoulder. Dunia has a daughter, Irina, who lives and works as a doctor in Germany, and a granddaughter called Laura she has never met. So what is Dunia's Last Love? Is it her daughter? Is it her granddaughter? Or is it Chernobyl? Dunia's Last Love is a quiet and quirky novel. Flights is one of the few novels by the 2018 Nobel Prize winner for literature Olga Tokarczuk available in translation. I combined the English translation by Jennifer Croft with the Spanish translation by Agata Orjezek. There are only 2 books by Tokarczuk available in Spanish, and they are also both available in English translation. The other one is Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, which I read in December, translated to Spanish by Abel Murcia. Now, Drive Your Plow over the bones of the dead, like Dunia's Last Love, has an eccentric elderly lady as its main character. And I think if you like one, you'd probably like the other, but Flights is something else entirely. Flights is a strange novel. If it is indeed a novel, I think I would classify it as a novel, but it can also be read as a collection of short stories. In fact, I think if I ever decide to reread this book, I think I would just read certain sections of it and not the whole thing. So Flights is a fragmentary narrative about travel and human existence. I like some of the fragments that make out this book better than others, and I think that some of them could almost work as standalone pieces. If you're not into travel fiction or philosophical fiction, then you should steer clear of this book. Flights has a strong anti-nationalist worldview that I personally share, but because nationalism seems to be stronger than ever in so many parts of the world these days, I found reading Flights unsettling and almost painful at times. Flights deals with colonialism and the othering of entire groups of people that goes with it, but I didn't find the tone preachy or didactic, which is always good. The next book, however, had that problem of sounding a bit too didactic. In Weather, Jenny Ophel takes us into the thoughts of a woman, wife, and mother who is worried about climate change. The whole novel is an inner monologue by Lizzie, a librarian who must deal with her everyday life and her thoughts of an impending climate apocalypse. Weather is a short novel, and it is written in brief fragments. I read it in just one sitting, and it left me feeling a bit cold. Perhaps part of the problem is that when I read Weather, I had just read the excellent novel Ducks, Newburyport by Lucy Ellmann. This novel uses the technique of stream of consciousness, in which we are privy to the ongoing inner thoughts of a character, in this case a housewife from Ohio, to explore all the preoccupations of present-day America, from climate change, healthcare, the presidency of Donald Trump, school shootings, migration, etc. I think that if in 100 years there are still people on this planet and they're still bothered to read novels, Doug's Newbury Port is going to need a lot of footnotes. The first thing that readers notice about this novel is how big it is. My edition has 998 pages if we don't count the appendix. Doug's Newbury Port is an engulfing read, and not just because of its length. I finished reading this novel around the time the current crisis began to affect me directly, and I couldn't help but wonder what the narrator would make of what is happening now. I felt bereft as soon as I closed this book shut, and that is not something that happens to me very often. And that certainly wasn't the case with The Other Americans by Leila Lalami, which centers around the investigation of a hit-and-run incident whose victim is a Moroccan immigrant, Driss Gerawi. And I wish I could tell you more about The Other Americans, but it must be the least memorable novel I have read in a long time. And you might be wondering why I read it, what made me pick it up in the first place. The Other Americans is one of the long-listed novels for the 2020 edition of the BookTube Prize. In case you don't know what that is, the BookTube Prize is a literary prize organized by Robert from Bardo and a bunch of other great booktubers that takes place every year. I think that the main idea is that booktubers and people who watch BookTube get the chance to judge their very own literary prize. Last year they only did fiction, but this year there is also a non-fiction strand. I signed up to be a judge for round one only. Just as an experiment, I was curious to see how it felt to be a judge in a literary award. So I was asked to read 6 novels, including The Other Americans, and then submit a ballot with my ranking. Luckily, I had already read 3 of those novels. The first one was The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong, and Disappearing Earth by Julia Phillips. I read all of those 3 novels last year, so you'll find videos on my channel page where I share my thoughts on them, and I don't want to repeat myself here. If you're interested to learn more about the BookTube Prize, you will find a link to the official YouTube channel in the description box down below. Another novel that I had to read for the prize, for the BookTube Prize, was Miracle Creek by Angie Kim, which is also a novel I would have never picked up myself. Miracle Creek is a courtroom drama or a legal thriller that follows an accident in a medical facility that kills a bunch of people. Look, I am not the right person to talk about this book because I have never read this particular genre before. And I don't think I needed any proof that this kind of book isn't for me, but I got it regardless. Bunny by Mona Awad is a novel I might have picked up anyway, but ultimately also left me feeling cold. I would have been attracted by the element that it has of academic satire and a satire of American academic life, because the novel is set in a postgraduate creative writing course. But the horror elements put me off. Again, I was reading something that would never really appeal to me. And, you know, I am all for trying new things, but at this point, my taste in books is well defined. And, you know, I already read my formative books when I was a young adult. And at this point, I have an acute sense of what I'm going to enjoy reading. And when you know what you enjoy, being forced to read other kinds of books is at best a waste of time. Luckily, I chose the next few books myself. The next 2 books deal with death in highly original ways. The first one is Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. Lincoln in the Bardo won the Booker Prize in 2017, and although I read it back then, I had to read it again because of one of my ongoing reading projects. I'm calling the project the Booker Prize Through the Decades. Starting with the current decade, I'm reading all the Booker Prize winning novels in order. And I'm glad I read Lincoln in the Bardo again because the first time it did not work for me. But now I feel differently about it. Abraham Lincoln's son, Willie, died from typhoid fever on February the 20th, 1862, at the age of 11. That real event kickstarts Saunders' novel about grief. Apparently in Tibetan Buddhism, Bardo is the period that happens between death and rebirth. It's a transitional state of the human soul after the expiration of their bodies until they are reborn in a new body. Saunders imagines the Bardo and peoples it with 19th century types such as white peasants, black slaves, or the son of the President of the United States. There is a chorus of ghosts' voices that can be at times confusing, at times annoying, but that is ultimately moving. Lincoln in the Bardo has the Civil War as a background, and the novel includes fragments of text chronicling the White House in the first half of the 1860s. I haven't read any of Saunders' short fiction that he's so celebrated for. Perhaps if I had, I would have been more prepared for this novel when I first read it. If you are new to it, I would recommend the audiobook production. For the second reading, I combined the audiobook with a written text, and everything that had confused me the first time around became clear. Now, if I ever decide to read Lincoln in the Bardo again, I won't need the audiobook. The next novel can also be thought of as a ghost story. As I said on a recent videos about some of my favorite books, Pedro Paramo by Juan Rulfo is the best ghost story I have ever read. After making that video, I felt like reading Pedro Paramo again, and let me tell you, it did not let me down. After the death of his mother, Juan Preciado goes to the town of Comala in search of his father, Pedro Paramo, whom he'd never met before. The novel begins with with Juan approaching Comala, a town now inhabited solely by ghosts. Reading Pedro Paramo is like having a strange yet vivid dream. Nothing makes sense and everything makes sense. The word masterpiece is often thrown around too easily, but Pedro Paramo is a masterpiece. Also, recently I made a video about a bunch of new books that I'm excited to read, and one of them was My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. Well, I read it. In that video, I said something along the lines that what attracted me to My Dark Vanessa was that it was a reverse Lolita narrative and that it reminded me of a French book I read recently called Le Consentement. Now that I've read My Dark Vanessa, I can say that Le Consentement is a much stronger book, and it deals much better with victimhood and sexual abuse. And I think it's a better book altogether than My Dark Vanessa. To my knowledge, Le Consentement is not available in English translation yet, so this comparison might not mean much to most of you. So let's look at Russell's novel. Okay, so My Dark Vanessa explores the sexual relationship between a teenager and one of her teachers. The teacher has a strange hold on Vanessa even decades after when Vanessa is in her 30s. Despite its dark themes, I found My Dark Vanessa to be a relatively easy read because we get the perspective of an older Vanessa on the events that happened when she was a teenager. I think that if the narrative had been solely told by the perspective of teenage Vanessa, it would have been a lot harder to get through. The novel is peppered with references to Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. A reference or two would have been fine, but there are so many of them that it gets too on the nose. I don't drink, okay, but if I did, I would have done a drinking game and down a shot of something very strong every time Vanessa talks about Lolita. The only time this novel made me truly uncomfortable was when it described some of the sexual encounters between Vanessa and Strain, that's the name of the teacher, with a lot of graphic detail. Despite the point of view being Vanessa's, some of those scenes felt oddly exploitative and out of place. If I were a snob, I'd say that My Dark Vanessa is middlebrow trash. It's just as well that I'm not a snob. If you want to see what other new releases I'm excited about, click up here. And if you want to see what classics I'm planning to read in 2020, click down here. And don't forget to let me know what you have read in March and if you have read or are planning to read any of the books I discussed in this video. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you again very soon. Bye for now.